Thank you all for coming today after today's joint committee hearing from the Education Committee on the critical race theory. I'm Representative Richard Brown, represent District 27 out of Kansas City, Missouri, and I am the Assistant Minority Floor Leader. What we heard today was oftentimes misleading and flat out false about what's being taught to children in Missouri schools, and that was by design. The public was not allowed to testify by order of the committee chair. So we're here to highlight voices who could not speak today because the public was not allowed to testify. We will have members of our caucus speak about some of their takeaways from the hearing, and then we will hear from leaders in race and education from across our state. But first, Representative Ashley Bland Manlove, the chair of the Missouri Legislative Black Caucus, would like to say a few words.
Thank you, Representative Brown. And again, thank you all for coming. For the last few months, and here today in the last few hours, the radical far right has distorted the truth about critical race theory and the 1619 Project. Let me be clear. These efforts and those happening in other states across America are nothing less than state-sponsored censorship. And what's worse is to think that the censorship, specifically targeting Black ideas created and developed by Black scholars and thinkers. And even though critical race theory is not taught in our state or nation's elementary schools, middle schools, or high schools, their mindless anger is meant to chill educators from even broaching the subject of race in our nation, which has been an undeniable part of our country since before its founding. But let's talk about what's really going on here. The backlash against critical race theory and the 1619 Project is a smokescreen by a conservative think tank meant to stir up old race-based sentiments and stoke fear in white people about people of color. Fears that have existed for a long time in the United States. Before he became the third president of our country, Thomas Jefferson, a slave owner, wrote a note to the state of Virginia that enslaved Blacks might retaliate against white people for the century and a half. For the century and a half, whites had held Blacks in bondage. For the, quote, 10,000 reconciliations by the Blacks of the injuries they have sustained. He gave that reason for why slavery should not be abolished, and why enslaved Blacks should keep their place, subservient to white men. This man was a president of our nation, and one of its chief architects, and one of its pioneering intellectuals, and yet some still deny that America has racist roots. Today, these far-right extremists exploit these old racial resentments to sow division, to reap more political power, and by distorting academic theory in reality pleads for racial understanding, unity, reconciliation, to solve the lingering problems in our society. In doing so, they have shown their true colors. They have made people fear the idea that Black scholarship might be a part of the curriculum in this nation's schools. Curriculum that dares to say the United States still has a lot of work to do to rid ourselves of racism. Curriculum that plainly states the dark legacy of slavery, discrimination, relocation, internment, and exclusion, and a litany of civil rights violations that have bled from the past to the present. Or to put it another way, curriculum that dares to tell the truth. Right now, there is a COVID outbreak, and the Department of Health and Senior Services, and Missouri is again at the top for Delta variant breakouts. But yet, we are here talking about if history makes you uncomfortable. For more perspective, I bring up Representative Paula Brown, Ranking Member of Education.
Good afternoon. As Representative Bland Manlove said, I am the ranking member of the Education House Committee. I'm also a 31-year vet, retired teacher of the Hazelwood School District. I think it's really important to know from some of the things we heard today is that the legislature creates Missouri standards. They go in work groups, they create the standards are sent to the Board of Education, and those are approved there. So we set the standards for what children learn every year. And I want to be also really clear, we do not have Common Core in the state of Missouri. These standards include changing the roles among Native Americans, immigrants, African Americans, and women. It also includes teaching and evaluating those changing relationships. We have been here for 400 years, and it's important to know where we came from and where we're going, and how to avoid the pitfalls and all the mistakes that we've made in the past. Educators must continue to ensure that students learn complete and honest history of our country. This includes teaching our greatness and our failures, both of which are many. I heard my colleagues today in the hearing say that they wanted people teaching the hard history. I hope they're being honest with that, and I hope that that's in the foremost of their minds when we come to this again, because there will be multiple hearings on this. Hearings that I hope that include the voices that were not heard today. Again, it is our hope that the colleagues across the aisle will continue to support the honest history that has made us the nation that we are. On that, I'm going to turn it over to Representative Marlon Anderson. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to be heard. Unfortunately, we have a substantial amount of citizens and taxpayers behind me who didn't have that opportunity, given the fact the committee was one-sided. This curriculum addresses and highlights many of the truths of American history. These events help mold a substantial amount of biased laws and unfair practices that continue to plague people of color and other minorities in an adverse way. We cannot pick and choose which story, the American story, we want to tell. Similar to the procedures that are established in this bill, the voices of the minorities are seldom heard. We never hear the story of the oppressed, only those in power. This is an attempt to censor the voices of several affluent African-American scholars, who are well regarded in their respective fields. I ask that we get the opportunity to be heard and we hear both sides of the story, not just one. And with that, I bring in Representative Ingrid Barnett, Minority Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative, and thank you all for being here. Well, today, what we saw was a dramatic display of isolated injustices experienced by individuals from their local schools and were encouraged by self-appointed experts on CRT. The only people who were permitted to speak were invited by the committee chair. They were here by invitation only. From a committee chair who clearly has an agenda to discredit our public schools. There were people in the audience who clearly wanted to testify in a public hearing and were denied any opportunity to voice their opinion. It is the height of irony that a hearing to consider censoring curriculum would censor those who are allowed to speak. That's not democracy. And I desperately hope that we will have more balance around this topic in the future. Hopefully, we will be able to work with Chairwoman, what's her name? Sorry. Hopefully, we'll be able to work with her after having the exchange that we did. But now what we'll be hearing from are people who did not get to testify, and we'll start with Rod Chappell, who is the Executive Director of our Missouri chapter of the NAACP.
Thank you very much, Representative. I'm Nimrod Chappell, President of the Missouri State Conference of the NAACP, and what I saw today was a complete travesty of democracy. In this house, this people's house, where we're supposed to be able to come and air our grievances, to actually provide testimony that might be enlightening for some of the people on the committee as to what CRT is, critical race theory, what it actually means to the community, and that it's a theory that is not being taught actively in schools. Today we heard nonsense like CRT is being taught in math class, that all of a sudden CRT or black people don't want numbers to add up in a way that is mathematically accurate. There was a senator, I think he was a senator, right, that actually said that today. That's ridiculous. And then to know and find out only at the end, after we'd been silenced, not allowed to participate in the hearing, that the truth is that these were hand-picked parents who had met with the chairman of the committee in advance. They selected the testimony that they wanted to hear, and that's all that was allowed to participate. When members of the audience dared raise concern, even amongst themselves, about some of the alarming things that were being said, they were hushed and silenced. This is not the democracy that we expect, but we know all too well what's happening here in Missouri, that the people are being silenced, and it doesn't matter whether it's senators proposing bills that would allow folks to be run over in the streets if they're alleged protesters, or if it's people who are naming folks in the police department who are actually participating in atrocities and crimes against humanity. You say it, you might end up with a felony for doxing a police officer and get prosecuted. Only to come here and be silenced here. It's not right, it's not what we expect, and we need to do better. We're calling on Missouri's legislature and someone to give a lesson on how to hold a committee hearing, because this wasn't it. It's my pleasure to be able to introduce Heather Fleming, a great supporter of the community. Heather?
Hello everyone, my name is Heather Fleming. I am the founder and director of In-Purpose Educational Services, as well as the founder of the Missouri Equity Education Partnership. This is a grassroots effort that we have created with a number of people, or you can see behind us. Today, I did not have the opportunity to speak. But if I had the opportunity to speak, I would have told them that I was disappointed on 3 levels. The first level is that as an equity educator, I was disappointed in the way that they misrepresented exactly what I do on a daily basis. What we do when we are teaching equity is we're teaching each other how to love one another better. That is what I'm doing. So to represent that as divisive, we can look behind us and see this is what America looks like. And so what does my work do? It brings people like this together. It does not divide. So I was disappointed on that level. I was disappointed as a taxpayer because my contribution to this society was overlooked and dismissed in favor of the majority population and what their needs were. Well, I'm in the community too. I'm paying money too. And as long as I am, I know what my children are entitled to, I know what I am entitled to, and I know what other people who look like me are entitled to. And then the last level that I was disappointed in was as a parent. One of the school districts that was represented at this hearing, I heard the woman speaking, and the only thing I really heard was that this was more about discomfort than it was damage. Discomfort, not damage. And what they were willing to do was to damage my children in order to not experience discomfort. Well, my children are also entitled to see themselves represented in the curriculum. My children are also entitled to see themselves when they walk down the halls and to see them in the people that are making decisions for them on a daily basis. My children are entitled to see our community leaders that also look like them. And so we just must do better because we talked about a lot of stuff. We talked about the well-being of students. We talked about the curriculum, we talked about a lot of things, but all of it was from the perspective of the majority, while ignoring that at least 30% of the students in our state don't look like them. And so they're entitled to have an experience where they did. And the final thing that I will say, and then I will go, is that too many people spoke from their personal experience and then tried to apply that to everyone. And one of the other things that equity education teaches is that my experience and your experience, they may be different, but they can live in the same space. And as long as they are living in the same space, what we have to learn how to do is to accommodate each other. It is not about making one person feel bad. It is not about shame and blame. It is about how do we all live in this world together as a cooperative unit so that we can improve our neighborhoods and our communities to the best of our ability, because guess what? None of us are going to be well until all of us are well. Thank you.
So at this time, we'll go ahead and we'll field questions that you may have for any members of the committee or any of our invited guests.
The Department of Elementary and Secondary Education has said, under current state statute, they don't have the authority to kind of mandate or censor curriculum. And I guess what are your thoughts on, lawmakers spending time on a topic that then says they don't have the authority to, regulate or mandate a singular topic like that?
And I'm sorry, what's your question?
I guess what are your thoughts on, lawmakers spending time, devoting so much time to a topic that then says they don't have the authority to mandate or censor?
It's really frustrating. I also am a 30-year veteran of teaching and educational leadership, and I know the role of the state and the role of local elected boards. And when we are in an environment like we're in now, where we have a pandemic, we're the 49th in the nation when it comes to funding public education. We're 49th in starting teacher pay, and this is what we want to talk about. If we were following, if we were providing the kind of educational resources that we should be, we probably wouldn't even be at this table. We probably wouldn't even be coming here. So it's frustrating. It's frustrating to see this issue seeing our public schools, our schools in general, becoming this kind of political football for soon-to-be candidates.
I'd like to add to that. While DESE does not have authority over individual teachers except the removal of a teacher license, there is a state teacher evaluation tool that has criteria specifically to teaching the curriculum as it is written, based on the state standards that, again, I'll remind you, we created. So while they don't have authority over the individual teacher, should a teacher be found to be in violation of the rules and regulations and of the school district can actually request the removal of a teacher's teaching license. So while it's a process, they do have some authority on who continues to be licensed.
This is for the lawmakers, whoever wants to answer. There was a lot of concern from the people who were selected to testify, as well as your fellow members of the committee, that somehow this kind of education or this kind of teaching framework would lead kids to become activists or somehow do some kind of great transformational, I think it was cultural transformation. Anyway, the question is, what do you all think is the role of this kind of like history education? Like, what do you think should be the outcome here, or do you think there should be any? I just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Okay, say that for me one more time.
I just wanted to get your thoughts on like what you think the role of this, of like a history curriculum or a diverse teaching curriculum should be. Like, is there a specific outcome that you want out of it, or anything like that?
Well, the outcome, the preferred outcome of a diverse curriculum would be a better society. This body has put a negative connotation on activism, but anybody from any military conflict or social conflict that has ever happened has been an activist. So that's literally ingrained into who we are as America. So I don't think one particular curriculum could push a person to be an activist if that's a bad thing. But if you're fighting for the correction of injustice, I'm very okay with you being an activist.
I wasn't in the room, so I might have.
Can I add to that? Just real quickly, because I think it's important that it also goes back to funding. We had that conversation a little bit in the committee, didn't really cover it a lot. But, you know, they talked about what gets tested is what gets taught. And if you don't have the funding for the testing, and then you're not going to spend the money or the effort or the resources on the curriculum. And so if we want to have a curriculum that embraces diversity and inclusiveness, we need to put resources to that. And we're not doing that in education.
I wasn't in the room during the hearing. I was watching virtually, but I didn't notice any of the people testifying or Black voices. So I don't know if that was okay. So I guess I was just wondering what kind of how that impacted the discussions about critical race theory, which has a lot to do with Black people.
Thank you. That's a great question, and I have to tell you, I was really saddened by that. The idea that we're going to have a discussion about how it is that a democracy, a civilized society is going to correct itself by identifying inequities in the past, and then at the same time excluding the very people who are saying that we've been treated inequitably, right? It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. But I think that actually talks more to the kind of a hearing that they wanted to have than the information that they wanted to gather. They wanted to hear from their friends who were going to support their political talking points that tend more towards school choice and allowing rich parents from the majority to opt out of an educational system that they pay taxes to, rather than talking about making sure that there's a real opportunity for people to participate in democracy.
Should there also be concern about talking about other subjects, teaching religion in school, those sorts of things? I mean, we're only talking about CRT today, but you could apply this to other things like religion, patriotism, stuff like that.
You know,
Briefly.
if I just may point out, I'm sorry, it's hard for me to not jump in. You might look just at the last few years. The last few years in the Missouri legislature, we've had bills specifically designed to protect the First Amendment rights of both teachers and students, coming from these very same folks that are saying we need to now prevent these teachers and students from talking about things they don't want them talking about. We had a bill that made it so that, which of course they already could do, that the teachers could teach about the Bible and a Christian perspective in schools. What the law said already existed, but they wanted to make sure very clearly that that was something that was allowed. They also passed a bill a couple of years ago, went through general laws a couple of times, that specifically made it so that teachers' First Amendment rights were preserved and that they weren't prevented from talking about some of their personal beliefs. And they talked about teachers that they thought had been stymied by the school system and telling them they couldn't teach the things that they wanted to teach. I think it is remarkable to see that contrast here today when it's a viewpoint that they think is being talked about in schools that they don't like. Because all of a sudden now it's the role of state government to step in and say, no, you're not allowed to talk about that. And I think we're going to see over the next few years as different bills come up on opposite sides of this same argument, exactly what you're asking.
And I could be wrong, but I kind of took away this as more directed towards public schools. I didn't hear any discussion specifically about private schools.
Oh, as of right now, I don't think they're trying to target anything with private schools. I don't think they have the authority to, honestly. And I think even they will admit that, though. They like to think they have the authority to do whatever they want.
This is I wanted to ask Ms. Fleming, if a Missouri resident, this hearing was their first time ever hearing about critical race theory, they're not really understanding what this whole issue is about, what is something that you would like those people to know about what you do in this issue?
Well, right now, I think that the term is being collectively used to basically address anything that has to do with culturally responsive teaching and just some of the, even trauma-informed teaching, some of the teaching methods that we're now being taught. It's also being used as a way to say, hey, no one needs to learn about equity at all. And so that was one lens that I did not mention that also I'm coming from. I'm a former public school teacher. I taught in a predominantly white institution. And so I think that another thing about this is that you were correct with not having any African Americans or any people of color in the room. You're talking about us without us. And in the end, the decisions that are going to come out of that are not going to be evenly balanced. They're not going to be able to really address what needs to be addressed. And so right now, that kind of offended me as well. And to kind of address your question, one of the other aspects of the meeting that I really had a concern about was the doubt that they placed on teachers' abilities and ethics. As a teacher in the classroom, those were all my children. No matter what their race was, no matter where they came from, any of it, they were all my students. And so it seemed to me that some of the people that testified felt that that duty did not extend to white teachers to also ensure that all students are getting the best experience in the classroom. And in the end, that disadvantages. That's going to lead to a disadvantage. I didn't teach any of my children that they were any less, no matter what race they came from, okay? But did I have to adjust things because I understood the experiences of some groups were different than others? Absolutely. That is my responsibility as a teacher. And so I would want them to understand that we can't keep using this and conflating CRT, which again is a way of examining our history through a specific lens, with any type of equity education whatsoever. That's just not true. And I think that the people in the room, what not having any African Americans in the room really showed was that this wasn't really about understanding. This was about being a dedication to misunderstanding us, to misunderstanding what we want to do, and to misunderstanding the goals and purpose of equity education and equity in our communities.